Okay. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for that. I had a couple of technical issues. Thank you for tuning in to our webinar today on Singapore's readiness for autonomous vehicle adoption, presented by SGInnovate. My name is Brian, and for those of you who don't know about us, we are a government-backed investor in Singapore with the mission to build deep tech innovations. At SGInnovate, our work involves connecting with the global deep tech ecosystem, working with entrepreneurial scientists to bring their innovative research from lab to market, as well as developing deep tech talent. Today, we have an amazing panel of speakers who will be diving deeper into Singapore's readiness for autonomous vehicles and exploring ways to harness the full potential of autonomous vehicle technology. I'd also like to encourage our audience here today to share their thoughts on this topic and engage with our speakers by using the Q&A box below. And with no further ado, I will now pass the time to our moderator for today, Satya. Satya, please.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Wasn't that video inspiring? Every time I kind of hear it and see it, it really gives me a great feeling of pride to be part of this. Today, I have the privilege of hosting a rather illustrious panel. Illustrious because of the individuals, but also the collective wisdom that this group brings on this very important topic of autonomous vehicles. The topic is about Singapore's readiness for autonomous vehicles. And in this panel, together with the panelists, we will explore Singapore's readiness in various aspects, the different segments, the different parts of the mobility ecosystem, as well as the various pillars, looking at policy, looking at innovation, looking at consumer acceptance, as well as looking at the infrastructure. I would like to introduce the panel first before I make my opening remarks. So let me start with Lynette. Associate Professor Lynette Chia is an associate professor at SUTD and is in the engineering systems and design pillar. She has done some really interesting work in this field, particularly on the issue of consumer acceptance of new autonomous mobility. Next, Niels de Boer, who is program director in future mobility solutions for autonomous vehicles at the Energy Research Institute at NTU. Niels again brings some very, very interesting perspectives, more from test bedding and kind of fine tuning the application of autonomous vehicles in urban environments. We have Ho Yin Tek, who is head of mobility solutions and head of autonomous vehicles at ST Engineering, bringing a very deep industry perspective of a player who has both developed autonomous solutions as well as deployed them. And finally, but certainly not least, Tay Kai Feng, who is Deputy Director for Land Transport and Urban Logistics at the Enterprise Singapore, who in some ways will bring the government's perspective. As your moderator, I will bring a professional services angle to this, having worked with a number of governments and private sector players on this very important issue. I am KPMG's global co-lead of public transport, based in Singapore, but working extensively with both government and private sector. Brian, can we have the slides? What I will do is talk about a piece of work we have been doing since 2018, which is called the Autonomous Vehicle Readiness Index. And in the next few minutes, I'll quickly talk through what this study involves. When we started this, the idea was to bring some method to the madness around the euphoria on AVs. As you know, that euphoria has somewhat died down since in the last 3 years, but it's matured and acquired a certain level of stability in terms of its future trajectory. The AV Readiness Index, we have continually improved it. So in the latest edition, which we published last year, it has 30 countries, up from 25 in the 2019 edition. The primary objective was really to capture all of the diverse information into a simple index, which could then give policymakers and public sector organizations a view on really how quickly and how fast they're moving towards being AV ready. So the index covers a number of different types of vehicles, autonomous vehicles, of course, but shuttles, buses, and EVs. We looked at different technologies, AI, digital networks, IoT, and LiDAR. And essentially, we do this measurement across 4 key pillars: policy and legislation, technology and innovation, infrastructure, and consumer acceptance. While the primary audience was really public sector organizations, we found over the years that this has been used very effectively by private sector, particularly companies which are looking to work in this space, either with government in deploying the solutions or innovators, to start thinking about where they should place their investments and which countries they should focus on. So it's acquired a new and very relevant need there. Next slide, please. So what are the measures we actually look at? So across these 30 countries, we look at 28 individual measures across the 4 pillars. So you can see in policy and legislation, we look at what is the level of regulation. We look at how much government-funded pilots exist. Is there an AV-focused agency? What's the readiness for change and the future orientation, as well as the data sharing environment and legal systems. So it captures, and these are measures, there are measures in each of these areas. Some of them, 4 of them are captured by us specifically for this work, but 24 of them are from various different sources, including WEF and other renowned providers. In technology and innovation, we look at industry partnerships, AV firm headquarters, patents, and interestingly also market share of electric cars, which we'll come to later, but it shows the level of speed with which the transport market is evolving, because in many ways, electric vehicles are a precursor to autonomous vehicles, and we see that as a leading indicator. In addition to, of course, a number of other factors like cybersecurity, cloud, AI, and IoT. In the 3rd pillar, infrastructure, we look at charging stations as a key metric, along with the telecommunications infrastructure, mobile connection speed, 4G coverage, broadband, and the quality of roads, and readiness to change in technology infrastructure. And finally, consumer acceptance. We see this as rather a very important pillar, where we look at things like the number of people living near the test areas, because that gives you a very good sense of how soon the country will adapt to AVs, because people get more comfortable if they are if they see these on a daily basis. We also look at ICT adoption, because that's been an indicator of acceptance of such new tools, as well as online ride-hailing market penetration, which again, willingness to use applications and other tools to get by in transport. So on these 4 pillars, when we rank the countries, if you can move to the next slide, we actually find that Singapore has ranked top. In fact, last year, Netherlands was number 1. This year, Singapore beat Netherlands, primarily because in addition to continuing to lead on the policy and legislation pillar, Singapore has made greater progress in infrastructure with a greater commitment to testing, with more areas opened up for roads on the consumer acceptance pillar for testing, more roads opened up for testing, as well as a strong focus on the idea of building more charging points for EVs to be adopted. So in this budget, you can see there's been a significant push on EVs. Of course, it does help that the investments by companies like Hyundai, where there's an AV innovation center, also bring Singapore up the technology and innovation curve. In these 4 pillars, Singapore is top on policy and consumer, but it is not far behind on infrastructure at number 5, and on technology it is number 11. So we'll be hearing from some of the panelists on what government is looking to do with private sector to go up on that curve. So overall, this study is a country level study, it's not a city level study. So some of these metrics are on a per pop basis, which is why we find that Singapore has some natural and inherent advantages in the way it is ranked. But basically what we do is put all this together, and we hope it will be useful to all of you as you look ahead. The full report can be found on our website. But with that, I will now ask my fellow panelists to each make their opening remarks, after which we'll get into the details. So can I ask Lynette to make her opening remarks, please?
Hi, morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. Thank you, Satya, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Brian and team from SGInnovate for hosting us. Today, I'll talk about one of the 4 pillars that Satya had already introduced, which is about consumer acceptance of autonomous vehicles. So let me share a few slides. I've been doing research on this topic for Singapore, the case of Singapore, where we're looking at AVs being introduced in Singapore, and we've done a number of surveys and different outreach events. So here are some of the findings that we have so far. So in 2019, just before COVID struck, right, we had a few events. There was one public dialogue on driverless mobility. So this was a collaboration with Toom Create, and it was a series of citizens debate that was organized in many cities across the world, Singapore being one of them. So in Singapore, we hosted a group of about 60 over members of the public. They came to our campus, and we had a small group discussions about different topics related to AVs. And one of the sentiments we did gather quite quickly was that there's general optimism among the public, the members of the public that came forward. About 74% agreed that the arrival of a driverless mobility would be a good thing. So, there's a lot of curiosity, enthusiasm that we observed. In terms of the hopes and the concerns, there is expectation that autonomous vehicles will bring about some benefit on top of the current public transport services that we enjoy now. So ability to reduce travel time, potentially improve safety, reduce road congestions was mentioned. In terms of safety always comes up. We've seen this in the literature also with when studies like this are done in other cities around the world. Safety tends to come up as the number one concern. Can we trust AVs? Can they react to different circumstances and situations? Are the tests and trials done in a manner that allows us to trust that it's been thoroughly tested before it's introduced? Cost also came up along with system reliability. So these were some of the main concerns that were brought up by the audience. When we polled a question about comfort in riding at different levels of automation, so some of you may know that the SAE, the Society for Automotive Engineers, have come up with different levels of automation for different vehicles and the technology being rolled out now. 2 from level 1 to 5 meaning the highest degree of automation. So we found actually decreasing comfort with higher levels of automation. So this is a point that I think needs to be addressed as we move forward and as the technology continues to develop rapidly. So this chart here shows how the fraction of people who would agree that they would feel comfortable riding in a vehicle with level 2 versus level 5 automation, decreasing as the level of automation goes up. Another event that we did was a community design workshop at Punggol. So this was a collaboration with Daimler Mobility. We were curious about, when AVs are being introduced in the different neighborhoods in Singapore. So Punggol has been mentioned as one of the places where we expect the AV trials that might happen in the near future. So we actually reached out to this particular community. So I think it's important to do surveys and have a sense of what people are thinking about, but the qualitative research is also valuable to understand the sentiment on the ground. So these are the actual communities that might see AVs rolling around their neighborhoods in the near future. And some of the findings that we found was that, again, higher expectations of AVs to improve the accessibility and reliability of transport in their neighborhood. Ideally, the service should address existing transport gaps. I think that would actually encourage or motivate or improve the acceptance of AVs more easily. And then promoting familiarity is key to greater acceptance of AVs. So they were very curious. Again, more outreach events, more education materials, I think would be helpful to encourage greater consumer acceptance. So that was just a few slides just to start off today's discussion. Welcome questions and comments. So in general, key takeaways: general optimism in Singapore, very cautious about safety that needs to be addressed. The autonomous mobility service that we think of offering should address a current transport need or fill a particular gap. And engaging the community is really key to improving this consumer acceptance. So thanks again, and I look forward to the discussion after.
Thank you, Lynette. That was really a very insightful piece on consumer acceptance and some of the actions needed to get AVs more accepted on the roads. We'll explore some of your points in the Q&A later, but may I now ask Niels de Boer to make his observations?
Good morning. So I'm Niels. I'm from the Energy Research Institute at NTU, and I'm program director both for future mobility as well as for CITRAN, the Center of Excellence for Testing and Research of Autonomous Vehicles at NTU, very long term. We've been at AREA, and we've been looking at autonomous vehicle technology actually since 2012, 2013. We had our Induct autonomous vehicles. They were very interesting, open, very efficient, looked like a big bathtub on wheels, and we have done trials with these vehicles since 2013. First our two Induct vehicles, later a Navia Arma, and at the moment we have the NTU Volvo NTU autonomous bus, as well as some other vehicles running trials. At the same time, in 2016 we launched together with the LTA and JTC CITRAN. So CITRAN is the center of is involved in testing of autonomous vehicles, and we do a couple of things. So the first thing we do, very important, is we're working at testing and technologies, and one of the clearest outcomes of there is TR68, the technical reference for autonomous vehicles in Singapore. First release was done in January 2019. We're working on a second release, quite a major update in some areas, and that one hopefully, not hopefully, it will be released third quarter this year. It's at the moment going through the voting and approval process as well as final editing, but we hope to do quite a major update in the third quarter of this year. So we're really still a lot of work to need to be done, but we're at the last little steps of the work. This technical reference is very important because it effectively provides a common guideline of what are the technical requirements for technical expectations for a vehicle, and we also use it as a kind of guideline to do the testing against the CITRAN. And I'm doing the testing of autonomous vehicles before they're being trialed on the road. So every vehicle which is being trialed on the road has been tested by us before on behalf of the LTA, and we've tested a lot of vehicles. We've tested more than 50 autonomous vehicles. Every vehicle gets individually tested. We don't do batch testing because they're effectively still prototypes, but we test. So we have milestone 1 basic testing in the 1 North area, milestone 2 extending towards Dover, Buena Vista and other areas. Milestone 3 is the one Lynette highlighted that people get worried. It's truly driverless trials at an SAE automation level 4. So that's still going. One thing that's very important is that these trials are development processes and not demonstrations, PR exercises. So the trials are very important to build up the maturity over time, because you can do all the testing you want in the labs and control the thing. Real life and real traffic has a lot of interesting interactions, and people say, yes, these are extreme use cases, but while a specific extreme use case is rare, most of us, at least once a week, if you drive very frequently, see something baffling behavior of road users at any point in time. And only extensive trials and continuous trials aren't being needed. And I believe that's one of the strong points from Singapore. In many other countries, there is a development, there is a trial. The trial lasts 2 weeks, nice videos, a lot of hoo-ha, and then trial is over and done with. But actually, after 2 weeks, the first trial, that's when you really start learning how to do it. So to me, this whole framework we're running together with the LTA, Enterprise Singapore, other players, to run trials for continuously in Singapore to develop the technology over time is really needed, because it's not a technology which you just roll out and deploy in 10 minutes. It takes a long time, and the trials are a very key step to that.
Thank you, Niels, for the role of CTRAN, and in particular the importance of longer duration trials, and we'll explore that a bit more in the Q&A. May I ask Yintek to now bring his perspective as an industry player and solution integrator in this field.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Satya, and also SGInnovate for organizing this session. My name is Ict, and I'm from ST Engineering. I'm the head of mobility services as well as the autonomous transport group. So for those of you who are not familiar with ST Engineering, we are a global technology defense and engineering group with customers in more than 100 countries. One of the big focus for us is on smart cities, particularly mobility, including electrification, but also autonomy. We have been exploring autonomous technologies for many years now, and one of the areas we have been working on is shared autonomous transport. So why have we been in this space? Essentially is to help to look at city level solutioning, manpower challenges, and in that case, in this aspect, we actually look at shuttles, minibuses, also full-size city buses. We work very closely with CTRAN and LTA. So in fact, my team was with Niels just last week, looking at one of our trials. ST Engineering works a lot on operationalizing city level solutions and at the systems level. So some of the things that we've rolled out over the last few years in 2019 in Sentosa, we put together AVs from different manufacturers, including vehicles that whose software was developed by ST Engineering and bound together in a common operating platform. This year, we had 2 deployments on revenue service, the first of its kind in the region, at Science Park 2 and at Jurong Island. We've also had some experience deploying vehicles, AVs in Japan, China, Israel, Australia. And I really look forward to being able to share our experience today, both with the panelists as well as with the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Yintek. I think there's a lot of rich knowledge there, which we hope to mine during this session. May I now ask Kai Feng to share his perspective, particularly having heard the panelists' kind of views on where the next steps might be with regard to AV adoption.
Hi, morning everybody. My name is Kai Feng, and thank you, Satya, for the introductions. I'm really quite pleased to share a little bit more about what we do here. Just a brief introduction about Enterprise Singapore. We are the government agency that is championing enterprise development, and we work very closely with committed companies to build capabilities, innovate, and internationalize. So, leveraging on what Lynette said, after people are accepting on of this kind of autonomous vehicle technologies, next up is to ensure that the businesses can, thrive in such conditions, and most importantly, they are able to survive well and able to deliver the kind of safe kind of services, and that this is really a tripartite relationship that the government has with the private industry. People like Intake, they have to come out and build the toys, make sure that they get tested in the playgrounds that Niels is looking after. And for us, our job is to make sure that the ecosystem is primed so that it is able to support such kind of activities. One of this is because we have to hold the vision that Singapore is well positioned as a regional hub in Southeast Asia for innovation and test-baiting opportunities. So I guess from ecosystem perspective, I think we all recognize that autonomous vehicles technology is something that is really deep tech, and it really takes a lot of resources for us to come up with the kind of safety standards that is needed to make sure that the vehicles can be deployed in a safe manner. There's also stuff that companies need to spend a lot of time, a lot of effort to groom engineers, and also to make sure that they have the kind of financial longevity to see through some of these projects. And that's where I think Enterprise Singapore comes in. We try to grow the ecosystem that there's a healthy mix of venture capital investors, and there's a lot of corporate innovation labs that are supported by Enterprise Singapore. One example is, for example, the Capital Land's 5G enabled Singapore Science Park. These are areas that allow for technologies to be tested in a controlled environment. And I think that's because this stems from Singapore's attitude on how we want to be advocate on on open innovation, and the business environment that is required is really needs to be quite pro business in certain ways to allow for these companies to thrive. So I shall touch on 2 points. First point I think is about how the government support comes in quite handy, other than allowing for sandbox trials as well as testing areas. Like the western part of Singapore that's been dedicated to such kind of autonomous vehicle trials. I think from an enterprise point of view, I think there's a lot of support that is given for entrepreneurs. One such example is the Startup SG grant, where it helps provide early stage funding for the commercialization of such kind of technologies. And the support is fairly generous. At the POC stage, we have like up to 250K of grant support, and at the POV stage, it's up to $500 million. Second point, I think, is about what Singapore government does is a bit unique here also, where we support the development of standards. So TR68, which is meant for the autonomous vehicles, that is co-created together with LTA. It really helps to clarify, the rules of the game, and to establish consistent practice specifications and procedures that can be understood by everybody else. This is to ensure that we can facilitate this kind of new growth and market opportunities. Number two is that with such kind of recognition of certain standards, we can actually help the companies go to market faster. And I think that's something that is not done by the regional governments, and it's really quite unique to Singapore. So I guess that's how Singapore government is facilitative of such kind of development of this kind of deep technologies. And I think the last point to make that is that autonomous kind of technologies don't have to just be deployed on the roads to ferry people around. From enterprise point of view, we think that autonomous technologies can also deploy in places like the warehouse, as well as in ports, as well as airports. So we encourage people to come and speak to us and find out more how Enterprise Singapore can be a partner to you in helping your company grow. And hopefully we can all move this autonomous vehicle agenda together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai Feng, for some very kind of interesting observations. I think there's a lot to chew on for the industry participants on this panel, as well as the audience. I have some prepared questions, but I don't need to use them now because there's like 7 questions I can see in the chat. A few are on the index itself, which I will address. And there are a couple of questions on cybersecurity and one on consumer acceptance. So I'm going to ask colleagues to respond to that. But let me take the first question, which talks about from Clemens, which says, why is China low in the EV ranking? And we've been battling this question ever since we started this index. So let me explain why the way the index is constructed, and the reason why China as a country probably fares lower than intuitively you might think it should fare. And that's because we are looking at countries. We're not looking at cities. So there is another question which I am also seeking to answer, which says, what about city level ranking? And the reason why we have done this at a country level is because the important thing with AV is that it needs city level, provincial level, and central level coordination, because there are so many factors involved in the land transport ecosystem that in many countries require coordination across all of these. So in many ways, when we rank using AVRI, we are trying to capture this complexity that exists inherently in land transport, and moving from a very traditional transport system to an AV system requires multiple levels of transformation in the land transport ecosystem. So that is the first point. So the reason why China as a country probably fares lower than what you might expect with all the news, including the fact that Baidu has launched robo-taxis in a couple of months back. All of that is great stuff, but there's a lot to be done at a country level. So in our index, what we do is we not only look at this at a country level, we also deal with certain metrics on a per pop basis, right? Like number of patents and so on, to give you a sense of the scale and the proportionality of things. So if you do read the index, which you can find on our website, you will know really the details of the measurement. So the solution to that is of course, if you wanted to look at a city level ranking, in fact, in this year's index, we've started profiling 5 cities in the 2020 index, Beijing, Helsinki, Seoul, and others, to start seeing, what's happening at a city level, which can give you more color on that question. So I will stop there, and now I'm going to ask Lynette to respond to the consumer acceptance, or rather the survey question, which I believe, Lynette, you can see.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Matthias, for the question. The question is, who do we address for the poll on acceptance? And if the number of respondents are low, then it might be a biased sample. So wanted some clarification on this. This is a good question. We are also very thoughtful when we organize these events. For surveys, you can go larger scale, and try to reach as much of the population as you can. With these sort of smaller outreach events, the numbers tend to be smaller. But even so, we do try to reach out to the correct stratas of the demographic sample. So we look at people from different ages, different education profiles, different genders. So that all of that is we attempt to account for that in our events. But again, like I said, surveys is another way where we can reach out to more, and in that way we get larger sample sizes.
Thank you, Lynette. I'm going to ask Niels to respond specifically to the question on cyber, which is interesting because the TR68 actually very squarely addresses the cyber question with some pretty detailed standards on safety and security. So Niels, can you respond to that question, which is really what are the cyber concerns around this?
Yeah, cyber concern. There is a lot of cyber concerns, but keep in mind that there is a very big overlap between functional safety and cybersecurity, also in safety analysis. So part 3 of TR68 addresses a lot of is purely on cybersecurity. It is a key portion. It's mandatory to meet the cybersecurity requirements when you go fully driverless. And it's also building on some international standards which are in place. So there is ISO, it's 21434 is a brand new cybersecurity standard for automotive, which is being pushed towards acceptance on also traditional vehicles, as vehicles are becoming more and more connected vehicles. It's still a challenging area because the whole infrastructure is still in development. The vehicles which are being trialed today are still pretty much standalone. They are connected, but not to the extent that a truly deployed system would be. So it is still a work in progress, and we are actually working quite closely. It's not only between CITRA and LTA, but the part 3 of the TR is pretty well driven by the Cybersecurity Authority of Singapore and together with DSO. So it is mandatory. It is being worked on. That said, it is has still quite a long way to go, because for a final truly autonomous deployment, the ecosystem is very complex and it all needs to be addressed. But cybersecurity is at the core of the standards.
Thank you, Niels. There's a question from Nipsey on limiting factors to AV adoption, sensor hardware, software, country infrastructure. I'm going to ask Yintek, because you have done not just a trial, but a commercial service, and you've kind of dealt with all the infrastructure issues. Can you come in and kind of paint the picture? Because I believe you also look at this not just in Singapore, but potentially in other markets. So can you share your views on that?
Well, fundamentally, I think in terms of AV adoption, it depends really on what you're trying to apply the AV to. Because AV is essentially an enabling technology. And at the end of the day, for someone to want to adopt an enabling technology, there must be a use case for it. So you have seen autonomous vehicles, robots in factories. So Kai-Feng was just talking about autonomous robots in factories. You've seen trials of robo-taxis. You've seen also for ST engineering purposes, autonomous buses. And at the end of the day, the rate of adoption is not so much about the technology, but it's what people are really willing to take in at a time when the technology is at a certain level. So I'm not sure you would know, but autonomous or automated systems have been in factories for the last 20 to 30 years. In fact, they were what drove the transition from Industry 2.0 to Industry 3.0. And right now what we are seeing is that there is an additional move on adoption for vehicles. Technology is, of course, the level of maturity of technology is, of course, one angle. The type of sensors that will come on. Actually, you'll be surprised, but very few of the sensors actually are automotive level at automotive grade at this point. Most of them are still produced in relatively small quantities. Sensor software is also currently being improved hand in hand with the hardware. And actually very much on the type of infrastructure, meaning the kind of setup, the soft as well as the hard, that cities are willing to invest in order to enable these technologies. In our view, for autonomous vehicles, adoption is really driven by public acceptance, as well as what people are willing to apply the technology to. It's actually not a problem now today if you were to have an AV, an autonomous vehicle, given the current technology, to run completely autonomous and driverless in a very closed environment where there's no other interfacing interaction with traffic. So very much like, and you'll be very familiar even with our trains, for example. Most of our trains in Singapore are actually driverless by design. But if you were to make it more complicated, if you were to throw in additional scenarios, which Niels was talking about in his introduction, then that level of reliability then gets called into question. So there's no single answer. There are many, many factors. At the end of the day, what really drives the adoption is whether the technology is suited for the use cases that are envisioned for it at that point in time. And as the technology improves, whether it's hardware, whether it's software, people will find more users for it. And they will always compare it against what can be done right now using systems that are business as usual, manned with people, so on and so forth. So no single limiting factor, multiple, but very much driven by business concerns.
Yeah. Thank you, Yintek. You kind of hinted on a very important point, which is what will be the roadmap of different sectors or segments of the transport landscape that will be more ready than others. And you pointed to the fact that closed environments, possibly ports, maybe university campuses, maybe environments which are industrial environments where you have more control over the variables will probably kick off this earlier than say private car on the road, which anyway is a transport policy problem when you're trying to be car-like. You know, if you make autonomous vehicles more easy to be on the road, we may have more and more Singaporeans wanting to have an AV running all over town, dropping their kids to school and you know, going off to work, and just use the same car for everything, which then becomes a policy problem for a car-light environment. So I think we can. That's an interesting point. I'm going to ask you and Niels to talk about that. One more question, which is in the same vein around tunnels and networks within building car parks. So I don't know whether testing has been done in this area, and what's the evidence so far with that issue.
It is something which needs to be addressed. So there are areas where you have challenges. So there is already testing done in, for example, bus depots, which are very congested and also partially covered. So that has already been done. Tunnels in itself will be a different thing. If you're looking at the design for Tengah, there is below the MRT an underground road intended for public transport and autonomous transport, and so you will get it in the future. There are technologies which can work around it. For example, the same localization technology you have for ERP2 could be used for this kind of application. So you got V2X to support localization and other things. So there are technologies available. Again, it's something you need to develop to, and you need to be realistic. This is not going to be a big bang that from day one we go from a human-driven car which can do everything to an autonomous car which can do driven anything. It's a transition where over time the applications will become more challenging.
Thank you, Niels. I just want to kind of respond to an earlier question, which I kind of addressed here, which is around the private car ownership from JM. I think you're absolutely right. I think this is an issue many countries around the world are grappling with on at a policy level on how do we bring technology on board and not have unintended consequences. And so you're absolutely right that most countries are going to focus on the sectors where the benefits versus costs are going to be benefits are going to outweigh the costs. So in that regard, we do see more adoption in industrial environments. We do see more adoption in public transport first before it ever coming into the private space. So to the question, how likely will we see Singapore allow EV on the roads? I think it is an open question. But if we were to look at this from a labor point of view, obviously the biggest issues with labor are in the foreign workforce in sectors like logistics, you know, some of the public transport, as opposed to say ride hail or private cars, right? Where a lot of locals, it's an employment sink in some ways. So I think you're going to see the speed of the way things are going to move will be different across these different sectors. There's a broad set of questions around technology and adoption. So let me kick it off with the index itself, because there's a question from Nipsey which says, what is the issue of AV readiness, the technology and innovation pillar, and Singapore seems to have fewer headquarters, and how does it fare? And that's precisely why Singapore ranks 11th in that pillar. But what is important is it's not just the headquarters itself, but what do you do with those companies in your market? Because as you've heard from the panelists so far, AV is not just about innovating something, it's about then adapting it, localizing it, you know, looking at the regulatory environment and making it work in that environment. So the countries and the cities which are going to get faster with dealing with those issues are going to rank more highly, and not just the sheer research. So if you look at that pillar and you go into our index more closely, Israel ranks very highly. In fact, it's #1 on the technology innovation, and that's not a surprise, right? But we feel that Singapore has a lot more opportunity to leverage that, and that was what Kai Feng was talking about in his remarks. But there are a couple of follow-up questions which to that which I wanted to raise to the panelists, which is raised by Wei Lin. SG does not have a large industrial base, and what should Singapore focus on for commercial success in AV tech? So I'm going to raise that with, firstly with Kai Feng, and then maybe the other panelists can chip in. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Aya. So, well, for sure, this questions like, should we open up for more trials and all this? Yeah, that's what we are doing. The only way for commercial success to be achieved is that you must prove to the public that this is safe technologies to use. And the only way to do it is to show through more test bedding opportunities, gather the confidence of both the government as well as other partners in the ecosystem. One example is, for example, insurance, right? You need to get all these partners to feel that technologies that are developed are safe, and it's not going to be an easy process, right? This is something that will take time. And that's why the government is pouring a lot of support to all these enterprises to make sure that they are able to withstand the long gestation period that is required for this type of technologies to mature. On the other end, I think there's also a concerted effort behind the scenes to make sure that the talent pipeline is being developed properly to support such kind of companies in the operation. So you need people from actuarial science, to come up with the insurance policies, how to make sure that the payment's done, everyone's covered, all the way down to the engineering talent, all the way down to the cybersecurity talents that have to be designed, to be nurtured. So this is not a simple exercise, and it does take quite some time, for the government's work to be seen. And I think that's something that we wanted to share with people, that we are keen to grow this part. It's deep tech, and the government is really there to support the enterprises. And the one good indicator of commercial success is that when the trials that we do in Singapore can be replicated into our fellow neighbors, friends in the ASEAN bloc, and if they can also take some of our companies' solutions and start deploying them, I think that is something good, to help promote positivity in these technologies. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kai Feng. I think you sort of answered the question with the second highest number of votes, which is what talents do we foresee to increase adoption? Can I ask Lynette, as an academic, to come in and share your views on this? Because there are a lot of concerns around, are people going to lose jobs? What jobs are going to be lost? Where do we get how does this benefit society in Singapore? And in some ways, it talks to the benefits question you've talked about in your adoption paper. But can we look at how is Singapore going to? How do you think we should be doing this?
Yeah, I think the transition will require some changes in the skill sets that some of our transport workers might need to start thinking about. Of course, it will be a gradual transition, and it also brings about new opportunities, right? But it's about being ready for the changes that would happen. Most of the autonomous vehicles are electric vehicles. So again, this is also in parallel with the transition in passenger transport options towards electrification. So being ready for that is also important. But there are many other roles, right, that we foresee AVs would need, that it could be onboard service ambassadors or safety ambassadors, backup drivers, technicians, and all that. So that there are opportunities also. Again, it's about preparing for the transition towards these new roles.
Thank you. Yintek, based on your trials, what kind of job roles were you seeing evolving from those? We've always said we want to move people from just doing mechanical or mundane roles to customer service. Are you seeing that transition happening in the kind of the job roles for AVs?
Well, it's very much early days at this point, and the news mentioned it just now. It's very much early days. When it comes to role changes in transport, especially when you talk about public transport, Lynette clearly, very correctly points out that it's going to take time. One of the biggest stakeholders that we work with and we regularly engage and update are actually the unions, because it does reflect a certain anxiety about what it means in terms of jobs. But when they come and take a look at the deployments that we have, they realize a couple of things. First, actually, a lot of the focus now is not about taking away a driver. It's actually about making it easier for drivers to work. It's driving a bus is a very complicated thing. You've got to navigate a 11-ton vehicle with 6 wheels, okay, because there are 3 axles. On a road, you have to carry 100 people, 150 people, and all the time there are people zipping in and out. And our roads are not exactly the most easy to drive. And to a large part, that actually gives it explains why so few people are willing to take on work as a bus captain. And when we show that the technologies that we have allow them to drive or to operate a bus more easily, actually it sends a lot of reassurance. Over time, of course, as the technology continues to mature and less and less is required of the bus captain to do the actual driving, but then actually to attend to the requirements of the 100 people on board the bus, the skill sets required and also the type of people who will come in will of course change. And in a way, it helps to answer a lot of the kind of concerns that operators and also especially LTA have about where to find all these drivers who can operate all these mechanical buses. Additional roles will come in. All our buses that we're working on, for example, have been 100% electric. And knowledge of power systems, knowledge of network systems are all roles that are going to come in, and much more quickly than the roles associated exclusively with autonomy. I'd like to just take this point also to highlight one thing about what you mentioned about Israel. Israel, yes, from a technology and innovation angle, is very high, and Singapore's strengths are should not be seen in the form of advancing the state of R&D. That should rightly be given to the countries where you can afford to pour billions of dollars into investment.
Absolutely.
Where we are stronger actually is in terms of systems design and systems implementation. In fact, a lot of countries will look to Singapore, LTA in particular, as a reference customer. What do we choose when we finally implement a system? Just to let you know, when ST Engineering deployed an AV shuttle service in Israel, we were in the news. Why? Because we were the first. That was the very first shuttle service in Israel, and we did that only just actually late last year. So it does show that strength in R&D, for example, does not necessarily translate to strength in systems and implementation. And every country has to find its own space and where it can best support this overall move into autonomy.
Yeah, well said, Yintek. Actually, Singapore's strength is really taking an idea or a concept and actually implementing it in an urban environment at scale and with speed and with safety, right? So in a way, being a quick test bed, dealing with regulation, dealing with infrastructure, dealing with communication, and all these things to deliver an outcome very quickly. So, and this is where it doesn't matter where the technology comes from, as long as we can bring it on the road faster than anybody else. I'm going to ask Niels, because Niels, I know you're typing, but can you give your oral response to the question on the crash? And I want to pick something which Lynette said, which is very interesting. People's perception of safety, and more needs to be done in getting people to think more about the fact that AVs are actually more safe than they might otherwise think. And that's partly, I think, a question of accountability, right? Who is accountable if something happens? The reality is, 95% of the 1.35 million deaths which happen around the world are due to human error, right? And that's a known fact. Now, but that is more a rational response. At an emotional level, how do you get people over the line to be understanding that AVs are inherently more safe? Even if you kind of did had many other variables to deal with, but can you respond to that question on the fault as well as how does TR68 match up? And I think we'll probably have to end with that question.
It's a very interesting question, and that is also I think one of the issues we need to looking at is that an autonomous vehicle will act will behave and decide differently what to do than a human would do in a kind of emergency situation. In an emergency situation, a human will act instinctively, and it will be a lot depending on experience. So a very experienced, but at the same time very calm driver has a much higher chance of success than a young, inexperienced, panicky driver which you have. And we talk about AVs needing to be safer than a human driver. The thing is, what human driver do you look at? Because even if you step in a taxi, one day you get a taxi driver which is an absolutely, you get in the taxi, you start looking at your phone, and before you know it, you're arrived at your destination. It's completely uneventful, boring trip. Next time you are in a taxi driver, and the taxi driver is not as good. He used the throttle as an on-off pedal, and you go shaking, and he brakes late and everything, and you go, oh, gee, that's a bad driver. So if you can't even compare with the human driver, because the human driver has a huge distribution in capabilities. That said, is people still expect an AV to act the same, but it will not act the same. So for example, will you decide to do A or B? Actually, I don't think an AV will make the decision. An AV will make a decision, and it will analyze the thing. We're using computers and algorithm, and it will pick the option which is the mathematically best option to take. It will not decide on, is this an old lady or is this a child? It will take the mathematically best option to decide what action to do, and we need to make sure that those mathematical options are the best, really the best options. So that is something we probably need to get used to about the decision making, because we cannot expect an AV to act as a human being with the emotions of a human being. It is a computer system. It will take decisions, and sometimes if something has a 75.4% chance of success and the other one 75.5, it will take the 75.5 one, because it is mathematically slightly better, even though the difference are absolutely minute. So I think that's something people need to think. The ultimate decision make is not like a human being. It's based on different concepts and outcomes and mathematics, and sometimes some people are comfortable with that kind of reasoning, and other ones absolutely not, and that makes it difficult.
Thank you, Niels, for that very considered response. We have actually come to the end of our panel, and I just want to ask the panelists: does any of you have any burning last-minute comments to make on this? Otherwise, I'll kind of bring it to a close. Does anyone want to say anything before I close? Because we are on the hour. Okay, doesn't look like. If so, I really want to thank all of you for being a very diligent as well as engaged audience with the number of questions we've seen. We haven't answered some of your questions, so rest assured, I mean, we will type them out for those we haven't answered. And of course, you can always reach out separately to us if you still want to engage and discuss more. It's been a fascinating panel, and I really want to thank all the panelists for the wide range of views. You've brought every possible dimension to this conversation, and I believe we're all coming away enriched by the fact that first, AVs are here to stay. They're going to move at different speeds in different environments within the transport landscape. Singapore has all the strengths needed to bring it to market first. And you would have seen EST, the Emerging Stronger Task Force, is putting this as one of the pillars of the future strategy for the country. And finally, I mean, as Lynette pointed out, the environment for getting acceptance is important, and we have to do more work in that area. And of course, the last word from Kai Feng and the government is really that there are a lot of support available. Please reach out and engage in order to make the most of this opportunity. With that, we're 2 minutes over. Thank you very much for being a great audience, and we look forward to being in touch. Back to you, Brian. I don't know whether you're going to say anything or we can close.
Yes. Thank you so much, Satya. I also like to thank all our speakers today, Niels, Lynette, Ict, and Kai Feng, for sharing their valuable insight and knowledge. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cover all your questions due to time constraints, but I'd very much like to thank our audience today for engaging with our speakers and sending in all your questions. Do also take note that we'll be sending out a post-event EDM with important information, including a recording for this webinar, as well as a link to the report that Satya mentioned earlier today. And with that, we have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you for spending your Monday morning with us. And on behalf of SGInnovate, I would like to wish all of you a great week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.